The elevator was broken. He fixed it. And then his whole life broke instead. It was a Thursday evening in March when Esteban Futrell pulled on his work gloves and climbed into the dark elevator shaft on the 22nd floor of the Vantage, one of the most expensive residential buildings in the city. He had spotted a fault in the cable system, a serious one, the kind that could have sent that elevator crashing down with someone inside. Nobody asked him to go up there. Nobody was watching. He just saw the problem, grabbed his kit, and got to work. 47 minutes later, the fault was fixed, the repair was logged, and Esteban went home to make dinner for his 9-year-old daughter, Anna. By the next morning, he was a criminal suspect. A wealthy resident on the 22nd floor had filed a police report overnight. Her diamond bracelet was missing, and she told building management that the only person on her floor the day it disappeared was the black maintenance worker. That was Esteban. If this kind of story moves you, take a second to like the video, because what happened next is something every single person needs to hear. Esteban didn't run. He didn't panic. He didn't beg. He walked out of that building in his work uniform, kit bag over his shoulder, and said 4 quiet words to himself before he even reached the parking lot. This will require documentation. Because Esteban Futrell had spent 9 years fixing things no one else could fix, in a building full of people who had never once learned his name. And he was about to show every single one of them exactly who they had been ignoring. But here's the part nobody saw coming. The person who finally broke the case open wasn't the lawyer, wasn't a detective, and wasn't Esteban. It was a quiet neighbor who almost said nothing. Almost. Before we continue, please tell us in the comments section where you're watching this video from, so we can know how far our stories reach. And also subscribe to the channel to help us grow and get to our 500 subscribers milestone. The cable had been whispering for weeks. That was Esteban Futrell thought about faults. Not as broken things, but as things trying to tell you something before they gave up entirely. A vibration pattern slightly off. A resistance reading that climbed 2 points higher than it should. Small signals. The kind of signals that only meant something to a person who had spent 9 years learning how a building breathes. The Vantage was 41 floors of glass and imported stone rising above the financial district. Its lobby had a fountain that cost more to maintain annually than Esteban's salary. He knew this because he maintained everything, and nobody up there knew his name. He had discovered the elevator fault on a Tuesday during a routine inspection of the 22nd floor shaft access panel. The service car that ran from the basement to the 24th floor had been logging a fractional delay on its brake response, 0.3 seconds longer than the manufacturer's specification. Nobody else had caught it. The automated diagnostic system had not flagged it because 0.3 seconds fell just inside the acceptable range. But Esteban had been watching the system long enough to know that a reading at the edge of acceptable today was a reading outside acceptable in 3 weeks. And 3 weeks from now, someone's groceries, or someone, would be inside that car. He had submitted the maintenance request that same afternoon. He had flagged it medium priority, which was the honest classification. It was not an emergency yet. It would become one if ignored. It was ignored. By Thursday, the fractional delay had become a full hesitation. Esteban felt it the moment he tested the car that morning. A half-beat pause before the brake engaged, like a sentence that stops mid-word. He pulled the car from service, called it in to Pat O. Williams at the front desk, and spent 20 minutes gathering what he needed before heading to the shaft. The 22nd floor access panel was behind a gray utility door at the far end of the residential corridor. The kind of door that blends into the wall so completely that residents walk past it for years without registering it exists. Esteban badged in at 4:17 p.m. The corridor was empty. The carpet was thick and dark, the lighting deliberately warm, designed to make wealthy people feel like they were walking into a hotel that had chosen them personally. He moved along the wall to the utility door, kept his boots quiet out of habit, and went to work. The fault was in the secondary brake relay, a component the size of a hardback book buried inside the shaft housing behind the panel. Replacing it required removing 6 bolts, disconnecting 2 cable harnesses, and then reversing the entire process with a new relay seated exactly level, because a relay seated 2 degrees off would throw the brake timing into the same problem all over again. It was the kind of job that took a knowledgeable person 40 minutes and an unknowledgeable person most of a day. Esteban did it in 47 minutes. He logged the completed repair at 5:04 p.m., noted the new relay serial number, flagged the old relay as the confirmed fault component, and recommended that the automated diagnostic threshold for this model be lowered by 2 points to catch this pattern earlier in future. Nobody would act on that recommendation. He filed it anyway. He always filed it anyway. He badged out of the corridor, took the service stairs down to the basement to return his kit, signed out at 5:22, and drove to Anna's after-school program on Mercer Street. She was sitting on the front steps with her backpack between her feet and the particular expression she wore when she had been patient for as long as she intended to be patient, and was now simply waiting for someone to acknowledge that. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with her mother's eyes and his stubbornness assembled in a combination that occasionally took his breath away. "You're 4 minutes late," she said. "Traffic on Clement." "You always say traffic on Clement." "Clement always has traffic." She stood, swung her backpack over one shoulder, and fell into step beside him. For half a block they walked in the comfortable silence they had developed over years of this. The specific quiet of 2 people who have learned each other well enough that words are optional. Then she said, "The volcano won." Esteban looked at her. "What do you mean the volcano won?" "At school, Mr. Hadley picked Jordan's volcano for the science fair display. The one that erupts with baking soda?" She said baking soda the way other people said fraud. "My project was about load-bearing stress in cardboard structures. I proved that a triangular support distributes weight better than a square one. I had data." "You had data," he agreed. "Jordan had a volcano that made a mess and smelled like vinegar." She looked straight ahead. "It's not fair." Esteban was quiet for a moment. He thought about what to say and rejected 3 things before settling on the truth. "You're right," he said. "It's not fair. Being right doesn't always mean you win the room." Anna considered this with the seriousness she applied to everything. "That's a bad system." "It's a very bad system," he said. "You document your work anyway. You keep your data anyway. Because someday somebody who knows the difference will be in that room." She was quiet for another half block. Then, "Did that ever happen to you?" He thought about the maintenance request he had filed on Tuesday that nobody had acted on until he acted on it himself. He thought about the relay he had replaced that afternoon that would now keep a cable car running safely for another 5 years, unnoticed, unannounced, the way all the best repairs worked. "Every day," he said. They stopped at the corner market on the way home. Anna chose the cereal. He did not argue with her choice, even though it was primarily sugar, held together by the promise of a cartoon on the box. It was Thursday. Thursday was her cereal. Dinner was rice and beans with the smoked sausage she liked, and she did her homework at the kitchen table while he stood at the stove. And the apartment was warm in the way small apartments get when the heat comes on in March and the windows fog at the edges. After dinner, she showed him the data charts from her load-bearing project, hand-drawn, careful, annotated in her angular 4th-grade handwriting, and he looked at each one with full attention, asking questions that were real questions, not performance. She fell asleep at 8:45, with the charts still spread across her desk. He covered her, turned off the light, and went to bed himself. His phone rang at 7:11 the next morning. It was Pat O. Williams. "Esteban?" A pause. The kind of pause that means the next sentence has been practiced. "You need to come in early. Mary Pitts wants to see you before the building opens." He sat up. "What happened?" Another pause, longer this time. "Carol Gillen filed a police report last night." Carol Gillen knew where everything was. This was not a small thing to her. In a life that had spanned 58 years, 3 marriages, 2 continents, and one very expensive therapist who had eventually suggested she was perhaps too attached to control, the arrangement of her possessions had remained the one constant she could rely on. Every item in her apartment had a place. Every place had a reason. And nothing left its place without her knowing. So when she returned from dinner on Thursday evening, set her coat on the entry hook, placed her keys in the shallow ceramic dish by the door, and walked to the credenza in the living room to remove her bracelet. And her bracelet was not there. She did not assume she had misremembered. She did not check her wrist. She did not look in her bedroom, or her bathroom, or the kitchen. She stood very still for 4 full seconds. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She did something far more dangerous. She became certain. And Carol Gillen's certainty, as the people around her had learned over 58 years, was not something that asked questions before it moved. And then she thought about the man in the hallway. Carol's apartment on the 22nd floor had been her home for 14 years. She had moved in after her second divorce, when the building was newly constructed, and a corner unit on a high floor felt less like an address and more like a statement. She had unpacked her things herself, arranged them to her satisfaction, and had not significantly altered the layout since. The furniture was good, not ostentatious, she would have said, just considered. The credenza was walnut, original to the apartment's previous design, and she had kept it because it was the right height and the right weight, and it had never given her a reason to replace it. The bracelet lived on the credenza. It had lived on the credenza for 11 years, since the day her mother had given it to her in the hospital, 3 weeks before the end. A thin diamond tennis bracelet, not ostentatious, but significant. It was the last gift her mother had ever given her, and it held the particular weight of things that cannot be replaced. She had removed it before leaving for dinner, as she always did, and she had set it on the credenza, as she always did, and it was not there. She stood in her living room and reconstructed the day. Her housekeeper, Marguerite, had come in the morning, Tuesdays and Thursdays, same schedule for 7 years, completely trustworthy, a woman whose integrity Carol had tested more than once without ever finding a crack. Marguerite dusted the credenza. She did not move the bracelet. She never moved anything without asking first. That was one of the reasons Carol had kept her for 7 years. After Marguerite had left, Carol had gone out for lunch, returned at 2, answered emails until 4, and then changed for dinner. During that window, sometime between 2 in the afternoon and her departure at 6, someone had been on the 22nd floor who did not live there. She had seen him herself. She had been walking from her bedroom toward the kitchen when she glanced through the narrow sidelight window, the thin vertical pane of glass beside the door she used to check the corridor before stepping out. He had been walking along the far wall, a maintenance worker, dark uniform, carrying a bag. She had not thought much of it in the moment, because maintenance workers occasionally appeared in corridors, and she had registered his presence the way she registered most things that did not immediately require her attention, as background information, filed and set aside. Now it was not background information. She called the building's management office at 8:47 that evening. She was transferred to the after-hours line, which connected her to a junior operations coordinator named Brandon, who was clearly 23 years old and equally clearly unprepared for the specificity of her complaint. She gave him the time window. She described what she had seen. She told him she wanted the name of every maintenance staff member who had badged access to the 22nd floor that afternoon. Brandon told her he would pass the information to management in the morning. Carol told him that was not acceptable. She then called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The officer who took her statement was patient and professional and did not offer any view on the likelihood of what she was describing. He documented the time, the location, the estimated value of the missing item, and her account of the maintenance worker in the corridor. He told her someone would follow up within 48 hours. She thanked him, hung up, and then sat down on the sofa in her living room and looked at the credenza for a long time. She was not a cruel woman. This is important to understand. She was not someone who made accusations carelessly, who exaggerated, who treated other people's livelihoods as negligible. She had worked hard for what she had. She understood the value of work, and she respected it. But she also knew what she had seen. She had seen a maintenance worker on her floor during the window when her bracelet disappeared. And in 58 years of life, in a mind that cataloged and organized and rarely questioned its own conclusions, that connection did not feel like an assumption. It felt like a fact. That was the part nobody would be able to easily explain to her later. The problem was not that Carol Gillen was lying. The problem was that she was certain. And certainty, when it lives in a person who has never been seriously wrong about anything they cared about, is not a feeling they know how to examine. She went to bed at 11. She slept without difficulty. Across the city, on Mercer Street, Esteban Futrell was covering his daughter with a blanket and turning off a bedroom light, and his phone had not yet rung, and the maintenance log he had filed at 5:04 p.m. was sitting unread in the building's digital system, time-stamped and precise and entirely untouched. At 7:11 the next morning, Pat O. Williams called. At 8:30, Esteban walked into Mary Pitts's office on the building's second floor and sat across from her at a desk that was too clean, in a chair that was meant for short visits. Mary had a folder in front of her that she did not open while she spoke. She told him there had been a complaint. She told him a resident had reported a theft. She told him he was suspended with pay, effective immediately, pending an investigation, and that he should surrender his building access card before he left. Esteban looked at the folder. "I'd like to see the maintenance log from yesterday afternoon," he said. "The 22nd floor access record. I'd like to see the timestamp." Mary's hand rested on the folder. "That will be reviewed by the appropriate parties." He sat with that for 3 seconds. Then he unclipped his access card from his belt and set it on her desk without a word. He walked out of the building into the cold morning air, kit bag over his shoulder, and did not look back. But his jaw was set in the particular way it set when he was doing calculations behind a quiet face, and by the time he reached his car, he already knew what he was going to do first. He was going to go home. He was going to sit down at his kitchen table, and he was going to build a file that nobody in that building would be able to ignore. He was at the kitchen table by 9. The kit bag was on the floor. His coffee was untouched and going cold. His laptop was open, and beside it he had placed a yellow legal pad, a blue pen, and the small personal notebook he carried in his chest pocket every single day at work. A habit he had developed in his second year at the Vantage, after a repair he had completed got credited to another technician in the monthly report. He had decided then that he would keep his own record, not because he distrusted the system, but because he understood it. He opened the building's digital maintenance portal on his laptop. His login credentials still worked. Nobody had deactivated them yet. He did not know how long that window would stay open, so he moved quickly and methodically, the same way he moved inside a shaft or behind a panel. No wasted motion, no second guessing. He pulled every access log connected to his badge for the previous 30 days and exported them to a document. He pulled the fault report he had submitted on Tuesday, time-stamped 4:53 p.m., his name, his technician ID, the specific fault description, the recommended priority level. He pulled the completed repair log from Thursday, time-stamped 5:04 p.m., relay serial number, old component flagged, corridor badge in at 4:17, badge out at 5:04. 47 minutes, every second accounted for. He printed all of it and organized the pages into a single stack, largest to smallest, the way he organized everything. Then he made a second copy. He wrote the date on the top of the legal pad. He wrote Carol Gillen, complaint filed March 14th. He wrote his own name beneath it. He wrote, I did not enter her apartment. I did not touch her property. I was in the corridor for access to the shaft panel. Documentation attached. He underlined the last two words. He sat back and looked at what he had assembled. It was clean. It was clear. It was the kind of evidence that should have made the whole situation very simple. He also knew, in the part of himself that had lived 39 years in his own skin, that clean and clear did not always mean fast. Anna came into the kitchen at 9:45 in her pajamas, still half asleep, moving in the slow, deliberate way she moved on weekend mornings when she was conserving energy for later. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and sat in the chair across from him and looked at the stack of papers on the table. She did not ask about them. This was how she operated. She gathered information first. She formed a conclusion. Then, and only then, she asked a question. And when she asked it, it was usually the right one. Esteban closed the laptop and picked up his coffee, which was cold. He drank it anyway. No work today? She said. Taking a day, he said. She looked at him over her juice glass. She had her mother's eyes, and her mother had possessed the particular ability to make him feel that any incomplete answer was visible from the outside, like a hairline crack in a wall that looks fine until the light hits it right. Anna had inherited this without apparently trying. Okay, she said. He made her breakfast, eggs and toast, the weekend version, and they ate together at the table, the stack of papers pushed to one side, and she told him about a book she was reading, in which a girl discovers a hidden door in her grandmother's house. He asked questions about the plot that were real questions, because he was genuinely curious. She had opinions about the grandmother's motivations that were, he thought, probably more sophisticated than the author had intended. This was their morning, quiet and ordinary, and his, entirely his, in a way that the gray uniform and the building access card had never been. He held on to that. The message from Ashley K. Phillips arrived at 11:43 through the building's resident communication portal, which Esteban still had access to through a separate login tied to his personal maintenance account. He almost missed it. He nearly closed the notification before he read the sender name. Ashley K. Phillips, Unit 2209, Resident. The message was 4 sentences. She had heard about the situation. She was a tenant rights and employment attorney. She had some familiarity with how the building handled these matters. If he was interested in talking, he could call or text. She had included her number. He read the message twice. Then he read it a third time, looking for the angle, because in 9 years at the Vantage, he had learned that people who lived on the 22nd floor did not typically offer 4-sentence favors to people who worked in the basement without a reason. He did not find one. He wrote her number on the legal pad beneath his notes. He would think about it. On a Tuesday afternoon, 17 days after he had surrendered his access card, Esteban was sitting at his kitchen table when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He picked it up without hesitation. He always answered unknown numbers. You never knew what needed knowing. The voice on the other end was professional, measured, and introduced itself as Lois J. Flores, attorney at law, representing Carol A. Gillen. Ms. Flores informed him that her client remained committed to pursuing the matter to its full resolution. She informed him that a formal civil claim was being considered. She used the word prepared more than once, in the particular way attorneys used it, not as a description of readiness, but as a warning dressed in procedure. Esteban wrote Lois J. Flores's name on the legal pad. He wrote the time of the call. He wrote down every specific phrase she used, verbatim, the way he had been trained to document anomalies, precisely, without interpretation. He said, "Thank you for letting me know." He said, "Everything will be handled through proper channels." He said nothing else. He hung up. He set the phone face down on the table, and in the doorway, in her school uniform, backpack on, science fair charts rolled and tucked under one arm, Anna looked at him with her mother's eyes and her own voice, steady and quiet. "Is everything okay, Dad?" He looked at his daughter, at the rolled charts, at the uniform she had put on herself that morning without being asked, because she was 9 and she had decided that getting herself ready was something she could do, and so she did it. "Everything's okay," he said. He picked up the legal pad and added one more line. "Call Ashley K. Phillips." He called her that same evening, after Anna was in bed. He had spent the afternoon thinking about whether to do it, which was unusual for him. Esteban was not someone who spent long periods deciding things. He gathered information, assessed it, moved. But something about accepting help from a resident of the building where he had just been accused made him careful. He did not want to walk into an arrangement he did not understand. Ashley answered on the second ring. Her voice was direct and unhurried, the voice of someone who had learned to make other people feel like they had her full attention. She told him she had been following the situation through the building's internal communications. She told him she had seen the maintenance log request he had made during his meeting with Mary Pitts, the request that had been dismissed without review. She told him that dismissal was, in her professional opinion, a significant procedural error. Esteban listened. He asked 3 questions. The first was whether she had any personal connection to Carol Gillen. She said she did not. They had exchanged greetings in the elevator for 7 years and nothing beyond that. The second was whether she wanted anything from him in exchange for her help. She paused at that one. Then she said, "I want the building to handle this correctly. I've lived here long enough to know how they handle things when no one is watching. This is me watching." He wrote that down. The third question was what she needed from him. She said, "Send me everything you have, tonight if possible." He sent it that night, every page, both copies. What happened next took 11 days. 11 days of Esteban sitting at his kitchen table watching a system move slower than his daughter walked to school. And it moved the way truth usually moves. Not in a straight line, but in the slow, sideways manner of something that has been waiting in the dark for someone to finally turn on a light. Ashley filed the formal records request on Monday morning. She asked for the complete 22nd floor maintenance access logs, the 72-hour window surrounding the incident, everything. The building's legal coordinator said the records were under internal review. Translation, wait. Ashley filed again on Wednesday, this time with a citation attached. The records arrived on Friday. They confirmed everything Esteban had already documented. Badge in, badge out, corridor access only, panel location consistent, no deviation from the logged repair path. She printed them, added them to his file, and sent a copy to Lois J. Flores with a cover letter that was 3 paragraphs long and very polite and left absolutely no room for interpretation. Lois Flores did not respond. And that was when Larry E. Forgy called. Larry had been head of building security at the Vantage for 6 years. He was a quiet man, methodical, the kind of person who noticed everything and documented most of it, and shared very little unless asked directly. He had not been asked directly about the camera. He had told himself this was why he had said nothing. But sitting in his parked car outside his apartment building on a Wednesday evening, engine still running, watching his own living room light through the window, he understood that was not entirely true. He had said nothing because Carol Gillen was on the residence board, because Mary Pitts hadn't asked him about the camera specifically, because it was easier to tell himself that silence wasn't the same as lying. Until he was sitting in that car, thinking about a man who had done everything right and was being punished for it anyway. That was when Larry understood that "I wasn't asked" is not the same as "I did nothing wrong." Those are two very different sentences. He sat in the car for a long time. Then he called Ashley Phillips. He told her that the hallway camera covering the 22nd floor corridor had been flagged for a lens calibration issue 3 days before the incident. He told her it had been offline from 3 p.m. on Thursday until 9:15 a.m. on Friday, a window that covered every relevant hour. He told her the offline status had been logged in the security system automatically, which meant anyone who had looked carefully at the security records during the investigation would have found it. He told her nobody had looked carefully. He told her he was willing to put all of this in writing. There was a silence on the line. Then Ashley said, "I'll need it notarized." "I know," Larry said. "I already made an appointment." The signed, notarized statement arrived in Ashley's inbox the following Thursday morning. She read it once, added it to the file, and sat at her kitchen table for a moment in the specific stillness of a person who has just watched a case close around its own truth. She called Esteban. She read him the relevant sections of Larry's statement. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Outside his kitchen window, the late afternoon light was doing what it did in March, coming in at a low angle, hitting the countertop at the edge of gold before it faded. "Is it enough?" he asked. "It's more than enough," she said. "But there's one more thing." She told him about Betty Rogers. Betty J. Rogers lived in Unit 2214, 4 doors down from Carol Gillen. She was 63, recently retired from a career in city planning, a woman who noticed things about the built environment the way other people noticed weather, automatically, without effort. On the same Thursday evening when Esteban had been in the corridor replacing a brake relay, Betty had stepped off the elevator at 7:38 p.m. and walked toward her door, and she had passed a man she recognized coming out of Carol's apartment. Not a maintenance worker, not a stranger. Marcus, Carol's adult son. He had a key. He visited irregularly, and Carol had been quietly funding him through a gambling problem she had never acknowledged to anyone outside the family. Betty had not stopped. She had not spoken. She had gone inside, made dinner, and watched the evening news. She had thought about it in the vague way you think about something that doesn't yet have a frame. It was probably nothing. It was Carol's business. But she had watched what was happening to Esteban, a man who fixed everything and said nothing, and she could not watch it finish. She called Ashley. The call lasted 40 minutes. Her building entry fob placed her on the 22nd floor at 7:38 p.m., 3 hours and 34 minutes after Esteban had already badged out of the corridor and gone home to make his daughter's dinner. Esteban set his pen down on the legal pad. "She saw him," he said. "She saw him," Ashley confirmed. "And the bracelet?" "Not yet, but the timeline is solid. Esteban, there was no window in which you could have done this. Your badge out, Larry's camera log, Betty's fob timestamp, they form a complete picture. Carol's son was in that apartment after you had already left." He looked at the legal pad. At 9 years of careful, unremarkable documentation sitting in a stack on his kitchen table, at the name Lois J. Flores, written in his own handwriting and underlined twice. "Set the meeting," he said. The meeting was held on a Friday morning in a second-floor conference room. Mary Pitts was present, along with the building's corporate legal representative and a woman from the management company's HR division who had flown in from out of state and had the particular expression of someone who had read the file on the plane and spent the flight rearranging her expectations. Ashley laid the documents on the table in the order she had assembled them. The maintenance logs, the access records, Larry Forgey's notarized statement, Betty Rogers' written account, the timeline, clean, annotated, unambiguous. Nobody in the room argued with any of it. The meeting lasted 19 minutes. When it ended, Mary Pitts asked the corporate representative a question in a low voice. The representative answered with a single word. Mary nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when they are absorbing something they cannot undo. 3 days later, a pawn shop 11 blocks from the Vantage submitted a standard intake record on a diamond tennis bracelet. The name on the seller's receipt, when cross-referenced with the building's resident access database, traced back to Marcus Gillen. The bracelet had been worth $14,000. The receipt showed he had received $800 for it. And somewhere on the 22nd floor, in a walnut-furnished apartment with a credenza that had never once been wrong about anything, Carol Gillen's attorney made a phone call. Carol had not given her permission, but her attorney had read the pawn shop receipt and the timeline and the notarized statements, and she understood something her client did not yet. Permission no longer belonged to Carol. It belonged to the evidence, and the evidence had already decided. The withdrawal arrived on a Monday. It came through Lois J. Flores' office, a single formal document, 3 paragraphs, citing insufficient evidentiary basis for continuing the complaint. No apology, no acknowledgement of what the complaint had cost. Just the bureaucratic language of a door being quietly closed on something that had, from the moment it opened, been pointed in the wrong direction. Esteban read it at his kitchen table. He set it down. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the wall for a moment, in the particular way he looked at things when he was deciding how much weight to give them. He gave it very little, because the withdrawal was not the thing he had been waiting for. It was a legal formality. The thing he had been waiting for walked through the door 2 days later, in the form of Mary M. Pitts. She called first to ask if she could come to his apartment. He said yes. She arrived at 10 in the morning with no assistant, no legal representative, no folder. Just herself, in a dark coat, holding nothing. He offered her coffee. She declined. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had built his defense file, where Anna had asked him if everything was okay, where he had written Lois J. Flores' name in careful handwriting and underlined it twice. Mary looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at him. "We should have looked at the logs on day 1, she said. The maintenance record, the badge access, the repair report, all of it was there from the beginning. We chose process over sense, and a good employee paid for it." She paused. "That's on the building. That's on me. I'm sorry, Esteban." He listened to all of it. He did not rush her through it, and he did not perform relief he had not yet fully decided to feel. When she finished, he nodded once. "I appreciate you coming here," he said, "in person. It was the right way to do it." "It was," he agreed. She slid an envelope across the table. Back pay for the full suspension period, plus a written reinstatement letter with his title restored and a formal notation in his personnel file that the complaint had been withdrawn and found without basis. She told him his access credentials would be reactivated before noon. He picked up the envelope and set it aside without opening it. "There's something else I need," he said. She waited. The incident goes in the building's formal operations record, not as a maintenance footnote, as a case study. What happened? What failed? What allowed a complaint to move to suspension before a single document was reviewed? Future management reads it. New employees read it. It gets cited in the intake protocol for any future complaint involving maintenance staff. He looked at her steadily, not as a formality, as a lesson. Mary was quiet for a moment. That's an uncomfortable request. I know. It reflects poorly on the building. The building earned that reflection. She considered it. He did not fill the silence. He had learned a long time ago that silence was not a problem to be solved. It was a space where people arrived at things on their own, and what they arrived at on their own tended to hold. Agreed, she said. It goes in the record. She left 15 minutes later. He stood at the window and watched her walk to her car. Then he stood there a little longer, watching nothing in particular, letting the morning settle around him. Ashley called that afternoon. She asked how he was. He said he was fine, which was mostly true. She told him she wanted to discuss a civil claim, wrongful suspension, reputational harm, the procedural failures that had allowed the complaint to advance without evidence review. She laid it out clearly and without pressure. She told him he had a strong case. She told him the building's liability was significant. She told him it was entirely his decision. He said he needed a few days. He spent those days quietly, without announcing that he was thinking about anything. He took Anna to school in the mornings and picked her up in the afternoons. He cooked dinner. He fixed a dripping faucet in the bathroom that he had been putting off for 2 weeks because he had been otherwise occupied. He sat with the question the way he sat with a fault reading, not forcing it, not looking away from it, but waiting for it to tell him what it actually was. What it was, he decided, was this. He could fight for money, or he could fight for something that would still be true in 20 years. Those are not the same fight. He had learned that a long time ago, in a building where people called for maintenance and never learned the name of the man who came. The civil case would end with a settlement that felt like a number rather than an answer. The case study in the building's operations record would sit there permanently. Every time a maintenance worker got accused without evidence, every time a manager chose process over sense, every time a door got closed on a person before anyone thought to look at the documentation they had spent years carefully creating. He called Ashley on a Thursday evening. Not the civil claim, he said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the record condition stands. I want confirmation in writing that it's been added and that it will be referenced in staff protocols. A pause. That's a very specific kind of justice, Ashley said. It's the right kind, he said. He went back to work the following Monday. Pat O. Williams met him at the basement entrance with a coffee and the expression of a man who had a great deal to say and had wisely decided to say almost none of it. They stood in the corridor for a few minutes. Pat asked how Anna was. Esteban said she was still furious about the science fair. Pat said that tracked. They went back to work. That Friday evening, Anna spread her load-bearing charts across the kitchen table for the 3rd time. She had a plan. She had revised her methodology based on what she described as the judge's clear inability to distinguish between a visual effect and a scientific conclusion, and she intended to enter the spring competition with a project that would be, in her words, impossible to misunderstand. She walked Esteban through all of it, every column, every variable, every control she had built in to make the results undeniable. She had added a second chart comparing her triangular support structure against the square one under increasing weight loads. The data points were hand-plotted in 2 different colors. The conclusion was annotated in her angular handwriting and underlined 3 times. She looked up at him when she finished. "Well?" Esteban looked at the charts, at the 2 colors of data points, at the underlined conclusion, at his daughter, who had been wrongly passed over, who had not stopped, who had gone back to her kitchen table and built something that could not be dismissed. "That's exactly right," he said. She picked up her pen. "You document everything," he said. "Then you wait for them to read it." Anna nodded, already writing. She did not look up. She had work to do. So did he. He picked up his pen. We appreciate you listening to the end. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this, and tell us in the comments what you think should happen next.